In the glittering world of British royalty, where every gesture is analyzed and every piece of jewelry tells a story, one evening would become the talk of the entire kingdom. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, a grand charity gala where the royal family would shine in their finest attire. But what unfolded that evening would send shockwave through the palace walls and beyond. Picture this: hundreds of cameras flashing, distinguished guests in their evening wear, and the anticipation of seeing the royal family at their most elegant. But sometimes the most unexpected moments happen when everyone is watching. Sometimes a simple piece of jewelry can become the center of a storm that no one saw coming. What happened that night wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. And it certainly wasn't what anyone expected when they received their golden invitations to one of the most prestigious events of the year. This is the true story of how one evening changed everything, and how the eyes of the world focused on something so small, yet so significant, that it would be remembered for years to come. The morning of the charity gala started like any other day at Clarence House. Camilla, the queen consort, sat in her private dressing room, surrounded by an array of jewelry boxes and evening gowns. Her stylist, Margaret, had laid out several options for the evening's event, but something felt different about today. There was an unusual tension in the air that Camilla couldn't quite place. Charles had left early that morning for a series of meetings, but not before stopping by her dressing room. He seemed distracted, checking his phone more frequently than usual and glancing at the jewelry collection with an expression Camilla had never seen before. When she asked if everything was all right, he simply kissed her forehead and said they would talk later. The gala was in honor of a children's charity that had been close to Diana's heart many years ago. The irony wasn't lost on Camilla that she would be attending an event that celebrated the memory of Charles's first wife. But she had learned to navigate these delicate situations with grace and dignity over the years. As Margaret began laying out the jewelry options, Camilla's eyes fell upon a particular necklace that seemed out of place among her usual collection. It was an exquisite sapphire and diamond piece that sparkled with an almost magical quality under the room's chandelier. The deep blue stones were surrounded by perfectly cut diamonds, creating a pattern that was both elegant and striking. Margaret noticed her interest immediately. The necklace had arrived that morning with a note from Charles, though the message was unusually brief. It simply read, "For tonight's special occasion. With love, Charles." There was something about the way the note was written that suggested more than just a romantic gesture. Camilla picked up the necklace, feeling its weight in her hands. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, clearly the work of a master jeweler. The sapphires seemed to hold secrets within their depths, and the diamonds caught the light in a way that made them appear almost alive. She had never seen this particular piece before, which was surprising given her extensive knowledge of the royal jewelry collection. When she asked Margaret about the necklace's origin, the stylist seemed oddly evasive. She mentioned that it had come from the palace vaults, but couldn't provide any specific details about its history. This was unusual, as Margaret prided herself on knowing the provenance of every piece in the royal collection. Meanwhile, at Kensington Palace, Kate was going through her own preparations for the evening. William had been unusually quiet during breakfast, spending most of his time reading through what appeared to be official documents. Their children had already left for school, leaving the house feeling empty and somehow tense. Kate's dresser, Sarah, had prepared a beautiful navy blue gown that would complement her natural elegance. The dress was a creation by one of her favorite designers, tailored to perfection and appropriate for the formal nature of the event. But as Sarah began suggesting jewelry options, Kate realized that something important was missing from her collection. She had been planning to wear a particular sapphire necklace that had special significance. It wasn't just any piece of jewelry, but one that held deep emotional value and had been part of several important occasions in her life as a royal. The necklace had been a wedding gift, carefully selected to honor both tradition and personal meaning. When Kate asked Sarah about the missing necklace, the dresser seemed genuinely confused. They searched through all the jewelry boxes, checked the safe, and even contacted the palace security team. The necklace was simply not there. This was particularly troubling because Kate remembered specifically requesting that it be cleaned and prepared for tonight's event. A phone call to the palace jewelry curator revealed something unexpected. The necklace had been requested earlier that week, but not by Kate or her staff. The request had come through official channels, but from a different member of the royal family. The curator, bound by protocol, couldn't reveal who had made the request without proper authorization. Kate felt a strange mixture of confusion and concern. In all her years as a royal, jewelry had never simply disappeared from her collection. The security protocols were too strict and the tracking systems too comprehensive for such a thing to happen by accident. This had to be intentional. She decided to call William, who was still in his meeting. When he finally answered, his voice carried a tone she rarely heard. He seemed to already know what she was calling about, which struck her as odd. He assured her that everything would be sorted out, but his words felt hollow and rehearsed. Back at Clarence's house, Camilla was now fully dressed for the evening. The mysterious sapphire necklace looked stunning against her navy blue gown, creating an ensemble that was both regal and sophisticated. But as she looked at herself in the mirror, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Charles had returned home and was now getting dressed in his formal evening wear. He complimented Camilla on how beautiful she looked, but his attention seemed particularly focused on the necklace. When she mentioned how perfect it was for the occasion, he simply nodded and smiled, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he knew more than he was saying. The palace staff had been working all day to ensure that every detail of the evening would be perfect. The gala was being held at one of London's most prestigious venues, and the guest list included some of the most influential people in British society. The media coverage would be extensive, with photographers positioned to capture every moment of the royal family's arrival and interaction with guests. Security briefings had been conducted throughout the day, with particular attention paid to the areas where the royal family would be spending their time. The event coordinators had created detailed schedules to ensure that all protocols would be followed and that the evening would proceed without any complications. But despite all the careful planning, there was an undercurrent of tension among the staff that was hard to ignore. Whispered conversations stopped when senior officials walked by, and there seemed to be an unusual number of last-minute changes to the evening's arrangements. The children's charity that was being honored had no idea that their special evening was about to become the center of a royal drama. They had worked for months to organize the perfect event, hoping to raise both funds and awareness for their important cause. The fact that the royal family would be in attendance was already beyond their wildest dreams. As the evening approached, cars began arriving at the venue. The red carpet had been rolled out, and photographers were positioned to capture the perfect shots. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation, as everyone waited for the arrival of the royal family. Kate and William were the first to arrive, stepping out of their car to a chorus of camera flashes and cheers from the gathered crowd. Kate looked radiant in her navy blue gown, though those who knew her well might have noticed that something seemed slightly off about her usual confident demeanor. She smiled and waved to the crowd, but her eyes seemed to be searching for something or someone. William maintained his usual composed exterior, but there was a subtle tension in his posture that suggested he was bracing for something to happen. As they made their way down the red carpet, he stayed closer to Kate than usual, almost as if he was protecting her from some unseen threat. The venue was decorated beautifully, with elegant floral arrangements and soft lighting that created an atmosphere of sophistication and warmth. The charity organizers had worked with the best event planners in London to ensure that every detail would be perfect for such an important occasion. Guests were already mingling in the main reception area, dressed in their finest evening wear and excited to be part of such a prestigious event. The conversation buzzed with anticipation about the royal family's arrival and speculation about what the evening might bring. But nobody in that room could have predicted what was about to unfold. The evening that was meant to celebrate charity and bring people together was about to become the stage for a moment that would be analyzed and discussed for years to come. The simple act of wearing a necklace was about to reveal secrets that some had hoped would remain buried forever. The moment Charles and Camilla's car pulled up to the venue, the atmosphere changed noticeably. The photographers, who had been somewhat restrained during William and Kate's arrival, suddenly became much more animated. Camera flashes erupted like lightning, creating an almost blinding display as the car door opened. Charles stepped out first, looking distinguished in his formal evening wear. His black tuxedo was perfectly tailored, and he wore the confident expression of someone who had attended thousands of such events throughout his life. But those who knew him well might have noticed a slight stiffness in his movements, as if he was preparing himself for something significant to happen. When Camilla emerged from the car, a collective gasp seemed to ripple through the crowd of onlookers. She looked absolutely stunning, her navy blue gown flowing gracefully as she moved. But it was the necklace that immediately caught everyone's attention. The sapphire and diamond piece sparkled magnificently under the camera lights, creating a dazzling display that was impossible to ignore. The photographers went into overdrive, recognizing immediately that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The necklace was clearly a significant piece, one that commanded attention and respect. But for those in the know, particularly the royal correspondents and jewelry experts in attendance, there was something familiar about the piece that they couldn't quite place. Kate and William, who had been mingling with guests inside the venue, received word that Charles and Camilla had arrived. William's face seemed to tighten slightly, and he placed a protective hand on Kate's back as they prepared to greet the other royal couple. Kate's expression remained composed, but there was a new alertness in her eyes. As Charles and Camilla made their way down the red carpet, the crowd's reaction was enthusiastic but somehow different from usual. There was an extra layer of excitement, as if people sensed that they were witnessing something special, even if they couldn't quite identify what it was. The event organizers were thrilled with the attention the royal arrival was generating. The photographers were getting incredible shots, and the media coverage would undoubtedly help raise awareness for their charity. But they had no idea that the beautiful necklace everyone was admiring was about to become the center of a much larger story. Inside the venue, guests had gathered in elegant groups, champagne glasses in hand as they waited for the formal presentations to begin. The atmosphere was sophisticated and warm, exactly what the charity had hoped for. The venue's grand ballroom had been transformed into a magical space, with crystal chandeliers casting a golden glow over everything. When Charles and Camilla entered the main reception area, conversations momentarily paused as heads turned to appreciate Camilla's stunning appearance. The necklace seemed even more magnificent in the softer indoor lighting, the sapphires appearing to glow from within while the diamonds created tiny rainbows in the light. Kate and William approached them with the practiced grace that comes from years of royal protocol. The two couples greeted each other warmly, with the appropriate kisses on cheeks and genuine smiles. But as Kate's eyes fell upon Camilla's necklace, something shifted in her expression. It was subtle, so slight that only someone watching very carefully would have noticed. Kate's smile remained in place, and she continued the conversation as expected, but there was a new intensity in her gaze. Her eyes kept returning to the necklace, as if she was trying to solve a puzzle that was just out of reach. Charles, meanwhile, seemed unusually attentive to both women's reactions. He positioned himself slightly between them, almost as if he was unconsciously trying to manage the situation. His conversation was animated and engaging, but his eyes moved frequently between Kate and Camilla, watching for any signs of tension. The charity's organizers approached the royal group to begin the formal introductions and presentations. They were thrilled to have such distinguished guests, and their excitement was genuine and infectious. The children who would benefit from the charity's work had been brought to meet the royals, and their innocent joy provided a beautiful contrast to the underlying tension that was building. As the group moved through the venue, stopping to speak with various dignitaries and supporters, the photographers continued their work. The necklace remained a focal point of attention, its beauty undeniable and its significance apparently growing with each photo taken. But it was during a quiet moment, when the royals were speaking with a group of the charity's major donors, that the situation took an unexpected turn. An elderly woman, who had been a significant supporter of royal charities for many years, approached Camilla to compliment her on her beautiful jewelry. The woman, Lady Margaret Thornton, was known for her extensive knowledge of royal history and her particular expertise in royal jewelry. She had written several books on the subject and was considered one of the foremost authorities on the pieces in the royal collection. Her eyes had been drawn to Camilla's necklace from the moment she entered the room. Lady Thornton's compliment was gracious and warm, but as she looked more closely at the necklace, her expression began to change. There was a flicker of recognition, followed by what appeared to be confusion. She excused herself politely and moved away, but her behavior had caught the attention of several people nearby. Kate had witnessed this exchange, and something about Lady Thornton's reaction seemed to confirm her own growing suspicions. She excused herself momentarily and followed the older woman to a quieter area of the venue. Their conversation was brief and conducted in hushed tones, but whatever Lady Thornton shared with Kate seemed to have a profound impact. Kate's face went through a series of subtle changes as the pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. When she returned to the group, her demeanor was noticeably different. William immediately sensed the change in his wife's mood. He moved closer to her, offering his support without drawing attention to the situation. But Kate's eyes now remained fixed on the necklace with a new understanding that was both painful and clear. The formal dinner portion of the evening was about to begin, and the royals were escorted to the head table. The seating arrangement had been carefully planned to ensure proper protocol, but the close proximity meant that the tension that was building would be impossible to ignore for much longer. As they sat down, Charles maintained his role as the gracious royal patriarch, engaging in conversation with the other guests at their table. But his attention kept drifting to Kate, whose behavior was becoming increasingly difficult to read. She participated in the conversation when required, but there was a distance in her manner that hadn't been there at the beginning of the evening. Camilla, for her part, seemed genuinely unaware of the growing tension. She was enjoying the evening, feeling beautiful in her stunning gown and magnificent necklace. She had noticed Kate's occasional glances, but attributed them to simple appreciation for the jewelry. She had no idea that each look was actually a moment of recognition and growing understanding. The charity's presentation began with a moving speech about the work they were doing and the children they were helping. The royal family listened attentively, participating appropriately in the applause and showing genuine interest in the cause. But underneath the surface, a different drama was unfolding. During one of the video presentations about the charity's work, Kate leaned over to William and whispered something that caused his jaw to tighten. He glanced quickly at Charles and then at Camilla's necklace, and for the first time that evening, his diplomatic composure seemed to waver. The photographer assigned to capture the royal family's reactions during the presentation noticed this exchange and instinctively began focusing his camera on the subtle interactions between the family members. He couldn't hear what was being said, but his experience could tell that something significant was happening. As the evening progressed, other guests began to notice the undercurrents of tension at the royal table. Conversations in other parts of the room occasionally turned to speculation about what might be causing the slightly strained atmosphere. But most people attributed it to the normal pressures of royal life and public appearances. The charity auction that was scheduled to take place later in the evening was generating excitement throughout the room. Several high-value items had been donated, and the presence of the royal family was expected to drive up the bidding significantly. The organizers were hopeful that they would exceed their fundraising goals for the evening. But as the moment for the auction approached, it became clear that the real drama of the evening was just beginning to unfold. The necklace that had started the evening as a beautiful accessory was about to become the symbol of a much more complex story, one that would challenge relationships and reveal truths that some had hoped would remain hidden forever. The charity auction was announced with great fanfare, and guests began moving toward the designated area where the items would be displayed and bid upon. The atmosphere was festive and generous, exactly what the organizers had hoped for. But as the royal family prepared to participate in this portion of the evening, the tension that had been building was about to reach a breaking point. William had been watching Charles carefully throughout the dinner, noting the way his father's eyes occasionally darted between Camilla and Kate. There was something in Charles's behavior that suggested he was waiting for something to happen, almost as if he was bracing for an inevitable confrontation. Kate had spent the past hour processing what Lady Thornton had shared with her about the necklace. The information had been shocking, revealing a history that she had never suspected. The necklace wasn't just any piece from the royal collection. It had been a wedding gift, specifically chosen and given with deep personal significance. But it hadn't been given to Camilla. As they stood for the auction, Kate made a decision that would change the course of the evening. She turned to Camilla with a smile that appeared warm and genuine to anyone watching, but her words carried a weight that was unmistakable. "Your necklace is absolutely stunning, Camilla," Kate said, her voice clear enough for others nearby to hear. "It reminds me of one that I used to wear. In fact, it looks remarkably similar to a piece that was given to me as a wedding gift." The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment. Camilla's hand instinctively moved to touch the necklace, her fingers tracing the familiar sapphires. There was something in Kate's tone that made her suddenly uncomfortable, though she couldn't immediately identify why. Charles had heard every word, and his reaction was immediate and telling. His face flushed slightly, and he stepped closer to the two women, clearly trying to manage a situation that was spiraling beyond his control. But Kate wasn't finished. "I've been wondering where that particular piece had gone," Kate continued, her voice still pleasant, but with an edge that was becoming more apparent. "I had planned to wear it tonight, actually. It seems so appropriate for an event honoring children's charities, given its special significance." The nearby guests were beginning to sense that something unusual was happening. Conversations around them started to quiet as people strained to hear what was being said. The photographers, always alert to potential drama, began positioning themselves for better shots. Camilla's confusion was genuine and visible. She looked from Kate to Charles, searching for an explanation. "I'm sorry, Kate, but I'm not sure I understand. Charles gave me this necklace this morning. He said it was from the royal collection." "Oh, it certainly is from the royal collection," Kate replied, her smile never wavering. "It was placed there after my wedding, with explicit instructions about its care and significance. It has quite a detailed provenance, actually." William moved closer to his wife, placing a supportive hand on her arm. He had known this moment would come eventually, but he hadn't expected it to happen quite so publicly. His priority now was to protect Kate while minimizing the potential damage to the family's reputation. Charles finally stepped in, his voice carrying the authority of his position, but also a note of desperation. "Perhaps we could discuss this more privately," he suggested, glancing nervously at the growing number of people who were beginning to pay attention to their conversation. But Kate had reached a point where privacy was no longer her primary concern. "I think transparency is important, don't you?" she said, her voice still controlled but with a steel underneath that everyone could now hear. "Especially when it comes to items of such personal significance." The head of the charity, who had been approaching to thank the royal family for their attendance, stopped in his tracks as he sensed the tension in the group. This was clearly not the time for pleasantries, and he discreetly redirected himself toward other guests. Lady Thornton, who had been watching the situation unfold from across the room, approached the group with the confidence of someone who had nothing to lose. Her expertise in royal jewelry gave her a unique perspective on what was happening, and she felt a responsibility to set the record straight. "Your Royal Highness," she said, addressing Kate directly, "I believe there may be some confusion about this particular piece. If I may, I'd like to share what I know about its history. Charles looked as if he might object, but Lady Thornton continued before he could speak. Her voice was clear and authoritative, carrying across the immediate area and drawing the attention of even more guests. "This necklace," she said, gesturing toward Camilla's jewelry, "is known as the Cambridge Sapphire Suite. It was commissioned specifically as a wedding gift for the Duchess of Cambridge, incorporating stones that had particular significance to the royal family's history." The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock that spread throughout the immediate area. Camilla's hand moved to her throat as if she suddenly wanted to remove the necklace, but wasn't sure how to do so gracefully. The piece was designed to honor both tradition and the new chapter that the Duke and Duchess represented, Lady Thornton continued. "It has never been worn publicly before tonight, which is why its appearance here is so unexpected." The photographers were now openly focused on the royal group, sensing that they were witnessing something historic. The carefully maintained facade of royal unity was cracking in real time, and they were there to document every moment. Camilla finally found her voice, though it seemed smaller than usual. "Charles, what is she talking about? You told me this was appropriate for tonight's event." Charles looked like a man caught between impossible choices. His loyalty to his wife was evident, but so was his awareness that the situation had moved beyond his ability to control it. "Camilla, I believed it would be appropriate to share such a beautiful piece." "Share?" Kate's voice cut through the explanation like a blade. "That's an interesting way to describe taking something without permission and giving it to someone else to wear publicly." The word taking hung in the air with all its implications. This wasn't about borrowing or sharing. This was about something much more serious, and everyone present was beginning to understand the gravity of what they were witnessing. William stepped forward, his diplomatic training kicking in as he tried to find a way to de-escalate the situation. "Perhaps we could move this discussion to a more private setting," he suggested, though his voice carried less conviction than his father's earlier attempt. But the damage was already done. The story was out, witnessed by dozens of important guests, and captured by professional photographers. The secret that Charles had apparently hoped to keep was now public knowledge, and there would be no putting it back. The charity auction that was supposed to be the evening's highlight was forgotten as guests openly stared at the unfolding drama. The organizers, who had worked so hard to create the perfect evening, watched helplessly as their event became the backdrop for a royal crisis. Camilla began to reach for the clasp of the necklace, her movements shaky as the full reality of the situation became clear to her. She had been unknowingly wearing something that belonged to someone else, something with deep personal significance that had been taken without permission. "Please don't," Kate said, stopping Camilla's movement with a gentle but firm gesture. "Removing it now won't change what's happened. And honestly, it's too late for that kind of gesture." The words were spoken with a sadness that seemed to encompass more than just the immediate situation. There was a weight to Kate's voice that suggested this incident was representative of larger issues, deeper problems that had been brewing beneath the surface for some time. Charles looked around at the faces surrounding them, all watching with fascination and growing understanding. The evening that was meant to honor charity and bring people together had become a public revelation of family dysfunction and betrayal. The consequences of this moment would extend far beyond the gala itself. The silence that followed Kate's words was deafening. In a room filled with hundreds of people, the area around the royal family had become an island of tense quiet, with everyone straining to hear what would happen next. The photographers continued their work, but even their camera shutters seemed muted in the heavy atmosphere. Charles made one final attempt to salvage the situation. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about the protocols regarding the royal jewelry collection," he began, his voice carrying the practiced authority of decades of public speaking. But even as he spoke, it was clear that his words rang hollow. Kate turned to face him directly, her composure intact, but her eyes blazing with a fury that was all the more powerful for being controlled. "A misunderstanding," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying to every person nearby. Is that what we're calling theft now? The word theft hit the gathered crowd like a physical blow. Gasps were audible throughout the immediate area, and the conversations that had been happening elsewhere in the room began to die away as people sensed the gravity of what was unfolding. William placed himself slightly between his wife and his father, not to protect Charles, but to show his unwavering support for Kate. His message was clear to everyone watching. He stood with his wife, regardless of the consequences, for family unity. Camilla, who had been standing frozen throughout this exchange, finally spoke. Her voice was shaky, but there was a dignity in her words that spoke well of her character. Kate, I had no idea. If I had known the true significance of this necklace, I would never have agreed to wear it. Please believe me when I say that I meant no disrespect. For the first time since the confrontation began, Kate's expression softened slightly. She looked at Camilla with something approaching sympathy, recognizing that she was as much a victim in this situation as anyone else. I do believe you, Camilla, Kate said, her voice gentler than it had been all evening. This isn't about you. This is about decisions that were made without your knowledge, just as they were made without mine. The distinction was important, and everyone present understood it. This wasn't a conflict between the two women. This was about Charles's actions and the betrayal they represented. Lady Thornton, who had been watching the exchange with the fascination of someone witnessing history, stepped forward once more. If I may, she said, addressing the group, but speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear, there's more to this story that I think needs to be shared. Charles looked as if he might object, but Lady Thornton continued with the confidence of someone who had spent decades studying royal history. The Cambridge Sapphire Suite wasn't just commissioned as a wedding gift. It was specifically designed to incorporate stones from Princess Diana's personal collection. The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Diana's name hadn't been mentioned all evening, but her presence had been felt throughout the event dedicated to one of her favorite charities. Now, suddenly, she was at the center of the story in a way that no one could have anticipated. The sapphires, Lady Thornton continued, her voice carrying clearly through the now completely silent room, were taken from a pair of earrings that Princess Diana wore frequently during the later years of her marriage. They were among her most cherished pieces, and she specifically requested that they be preserved for future generations of the royal family. Camilla's hand moved to her throat again, but this time it seemed less about removing the necklace and more about the weight of what she now understood she was wearing. Stones that had once adorned Diana, now worn by the woman who had married her ex-husband, at an event honoring Diana's memory. The photographers were having trouble keeping up with the rapidly unfolding drama. Every revelation seemed to add another layer to the story, and they knew they were documenting something that would be analyzed and discussed for years to come. Kate's composure finally began to crack slightly, not from anger, but from the emotional weight of the revelation. She wore those earrings to so many events, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I remember seeing pictures of her wearing them when she visited children's hospitals and charity events. She would have been heartbroken to know that stones from her jewelry were being used this way. William moved closer to his wife, offering silent support as she processed the full implications of what had happened. This wasn't just about a stolen necklace anymore. This was about dishonoring Diana's memory and betraying the trust that had been placed in the royal family to preserve her legacy. Charles seemed to age before everyone's eyes as the consequences of his actions became clear. What had perhaps seemed like a small transgression in private had become a public humiliation that threatened to damage the royal family's reputation irreparably. The charity organizers, who had been watching in shock from the edges of the crowd, finally realized that they needed to take action to protect their event. The head of the organization approached the royal group with obvious reluctance. "Your Majesties," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Perhaps it would be best if we move to a private area to continue this discussion. Our guests are here to support the children, and I'm concerned that this situation is overshadowing the important work we're trying to do." It was a diplomatic way of asking the royal family to take their drama elsewhere, and Everyone understood the request. But Kate had one more thing she needed to say before they could leave. "You're absolutely right," she said to the charity head, her voice regaining its strength. "The children should be the focus tonight, not family drama. But I think it's important that everyone understands what's really happened here." She turned to address the crowd more broadly, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "The necklace that has been worn tonight belongs to the Cambridge collection. It contains stones that once belonged to Princess Diana, stones that were meant to honor her memory and continue her legacy of service. Instead, they've been used in a way that betrays everything she stood for." The words were delivered with such conviction and emotional truth that they seemed to resonate with every person in the room. This wasn't just about jewelry or royal protocol. This was about honoring the memory of someone who had touched the lives of millions of people. Camilla, with remarkable grace, given the circumstances, began to unfasten the necklace. Her movements were deliberate and dignified, and when she held out the piece to Kate, there was genuine remorse in her eyes. "This belongs with you," she said simply. "I'm sorry that I was unknowingly part of something that caused you pain." Kate accepted the necklace, but her expression toward Camilla remained kind. "Thank you," she said, "and I'm sorry that you were put in this position without knowing the truth." Charles stood watching as his wife returned jewelry to his son's wife, the weight of his actions finally fully apparent to him. The evening that was supposed to celebrate charity had instead revealed the cost of his choices, not just to his family, but to his reputation and legacy. The photographers captured every moment of the exchange, knowing that these images would become iconic representations of royal family dysfunction. The story would dominate headlines for weeks, but more importantly, it would change the dynamic within the family forever. As the royal family finally moved away from the crowd toward a private area, the charity gala slowly resumed its intended purpose. But everyone present knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, a moment when the carefully maintained facade of royal unity had cracked open to reveal the very human struggles underneath. The children's charity would indeed benefit from the evening, not just from the funds raised, but from the unprecedented media attention the event would receive. The story of a necklace would bring global focus to their work, though not in the way anyone had planned. In the days that followed, the incident would be analyzed from every possible angle. Royal experts would debate the implications for the monarchy, while jewelry historians would examine the significance of Diana's stones being used without permission. But for those who were there that night, the memory would always be of the moment when truth prevailed over protocol, and when Kate Middleton showed the world that some things are more important than maintaining appearances. The gala that was meant to be a quiet celebration of charity had become a defining moment in royal history. And the necklace that started it all would be returned to its proper place, along with the dignity and respect it deserved. The truth had been painful, but it had also been liberating, clearing the air and establishing new boundaries that would guide the family's relationships going forward. The evening ended with a deeper understanding of what loyalty truly means and what happens when trust is broken in the most public way possible. But it also showed the power of grace under pressure and how dignity can triumph even in the most difficult circumstances.